This Shabbat is called Shabbat Hagadol. It's called Shabbat Hagadol because in the Haftarah for today, the prophetic reading, this is known as the Shabbat Hagadol v'Hanorah, the great and awesome Sabbath before the redemption. Some people thought playfully it's called Shabbat Hagadol, the great Sabbath, because the rabbi speaks more on Passover than at any other time of the year. That does not apply to rabbis like me who talk long every Sabbath. So there's no difference for me between Passover and any other Sabbath. Manishtana, just the topic. But one reason the rabbis spoke extensively this time of year, there are always questions about typically how to do the Seder and the which foods are kosher for Passover, which aren't, which of course is not really our concern here. Let me share a little bit about each of the four levels of Passover. I want to talk a little bit about the inner Haggadah, about Sfat Emet, and then take your questions. First of all, one thing that we've done every year at our Seders, I think from the very beginning, you may remember my speaking about this, is going outside and looking at the full moon. And my meditation as I look at the full moon is that our spiritual and biological ancestors back in Egypt looked up at that full moon in that night before they went out of Egypt, the Nile Delta, toward the Sea of Reeds. I try to imagine their faces looking up at the moon. I try to imagine their faces being reflected down to us. And I even try to remember, I even try to be, to reflect on the idea that they're wondering if anybody would remember them. And so perhaps in some mystical way, as we look up at the moon, they see our faces looking at them as well. It's always a very deep moment for us because Passover is always at a full moon, and we're connecting to this holiday of the full moon, even as we go back inside typically and have our Sedarim. I do recommend going through the Haggadah, even if you're not going to use one, to remember all of the stations along the way, the text for the Kiddush, and etc. But as you know, one thing that I recommend doing is memorizing the course of the Haggadah and then parting with it if you'd like to. Now, I know many families love to have Haggadahs, and they go around the table, and every person reads a part. I think it's a wonderful tradition. But there's also a value in remembering the core mitzvah of Passover, which is simply to tell the story. There's no Haggadah in the Bible. In fact, even the Haggadah of the rabbis, which you will find in the Mishnah, Tractate Pesachim, chapter 10, and you can look that up. If you just type in the word Mishnah, Pesachim, just like Passover, but with an I-M at the end, number 10, you will see the instructions for the Passover Seder without the full text of the Haggadah, which means with a bare outline, people knew what to do. And I'll talk about a little bit of that in a minute as well. If you like a depiction of what I call the minimal Haggadah, I sent that out in our email to my Inner Life Haggadah earlier this week. You can click on the link, go to my website, or just go to rabbifinley.com to the page that says printouts and handouts, and you will see a link that says outline of the Seder and the shortest Haggadah in the world. So going from the idea of the shortest Haggadah in the world, what is it that we're trying to accomplish on Passover? I'll try to say it as briefly as possible, because sometimes when you have the core simplified Haggadah in your mind, you know what to do with the complexity of the Haggadah. So if you go to that Mishnah, what you'll find is after you do the Kiddush and you put the articles on the table, the Haggadah is trying to help you fulfill the mitzvah of telling the story. Now, I'll say a few more words about the Hasidic and mystical ideas of telling the story. Right now, I just want to outline the Haggadah. So how do we tell the story? In the Mishnah, it says there are 4 ways to tell the story. 4 ways to tell the story. One way you tell the story is this is called version one, Gnut Leshevach, from a low place to a praiseworthy place. Or Gnut actually means degradation, Shevach means praiseworthiness. So there's an arc in the story. So that's version number one. Tell the story, Gnut Leshevach. Then we find out there are actually two versions of Gnut Leshevach. One version of Gnut Leshevach was we were slaves and now we're free. And that's introduced by the four questions. The other version of Gnut Leshevach is we were idol worshippers, now we worship the one God. And that's introduced by the so-called four children. So that's version number one of how to tell the story. Version number two of how to tell the story is study in detail from Deuteronomy chapter 26 that begins with the words, my father was a perishing Aramean, Arami Obed Avi. Now, in the Mishnah, they don't have that extensive text that we have in our Haggadahs today. The Haggadahs that we have today is taken out of a rabbinic midrash called the Mechilta. You don't have to use that. So when it says, now you do a drash on Arami Oved Avi, my father was a perishing Aramean, just tell the story of the Passover. We've done it a few interesting ways. We've told it backwards, we've told it forwards. Sometimes we begin back with Jacob and his sons in Egypt, the story of Jacob and his Joseph and his brothers. But the main thing is just tell the story. And that's something you can go around the table to do. If you don't want to go around the table with the Haggadah, you can say, let's just tell the story. Make sure that all your guests read from Exodus chapter 1 through 15 to come to your Seder. That's the ticket in. And just go around the table and everybody picks up where they left off and do a communal telling of the Seder. So the first way to tell the story is Gnut Leshevach. The second way is just tell the story. That's Arami Oved Avi. My father was a perishing Aramean. The third way you tell the story is to tell of the symbols. Pesach, Matzah, Maror. The Pesach is the sacrificial lamb. The matzah, of course, is the bread of affliction, and maror is the bitterness of our lives. Again, you can look at Haggadah to get that down, but that's very simple, or you can talk about it extensively. And the fourth way you tell the story is every person should consider him herself as if they personally came out of Egypt. So there are four ways to tell the story. Gnut Leshevach, degradation to praiseworthiness. Do a drash on Arami Obed Avi, which means just tell the story. Tell the three symbols, Pesach, Matzah, Maror, and consider yourself as personally coming out of Egypt. So the minimal way to do Passover Seder is just tell the story. You say the second way to do it is just keep these things in mind, and you'll see that in my minimal Seder, and you're good. I did it by memory. It wasn't that hard. And of course, you throw in all the songs that you want. Or the nice family tradition of just going around the table and everybody reading a bit of the Haggadah. So, okay, I'll go on to the next level of the structure of the four ways to understand a holiday. The first is the ritual. The second is the textual and historical. And that's why I say everybody should go back and read minimally Exodus chapter 1 through 14, which tells the story. And then chapter 15 is the poem of the destruction of the Egyptian army at the Sea of Reeds. By the way, try not to say Red Sea. In Hebrew, it is Yam Suf. Suf means reeds. So it's the Sea of Reeds. Not sure how the Sea of Reeds became the Red Sea. There is a Red Sea, but that's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is some crossing where the Suez Canal is today. So before the Suez Canal was built, it was a sea of reeds. And when you think of the parting of the waters, there's a parting through the Sea of Reeds, unless it was particularly flooded. And then, of course, it would have been like a regular sea, shallow, but it would have been a regular sea. So chapter 15 is a quite beautiful poem, and I think it's also worth studying. So the historical is textual historical are basically the same, reading Exodus chapters 1 through 14, 15. Now the next is the symbolic level. Passover is filled with symbols. And again, a good Haggadah can tell you what the symbols mean. Last Shabbat, I introduced a verbal symbol, which was the memra, or the galut, the exile of the divine word. So this symbol is not on the table, but in the Hasidic literature, it was actually the main verbal symbol of the Passover Seder, was the idea. And again, if you're not used to mysticism, it's a bit of a strange idea, that what happens in this world is a reflection of what's happening in the divine world. What's happening in this world is a symptom of the drama in the divine world. Now, you will immediately notice the similarity between, you might say, a theory of the unconscious and conscious life, let's say a Freudian theory, that was happening on the behavioral level is propelled by events in the unconscious. Some actually say that Freud got his start because of his knowledge of Kabbalah and Jewish mysticism, that there is an aspect to reality that you don't see that is then symptomized in what we call the day-to-day reality up here on the surface, symptomized and symbolized. Well, mysticism, they just reverse the vertical image. Instead of the unconscious propelling itself into the surface level, there's a higher level, a higher drama, and up in the higher worlds, there's the drama of the Sitra Achra, of the other forces, forces of darkness, a kind of a Gnostic image of God and the forces of light at war with the forces of darkness. And the forces of darkness have captured the divine word and taken it into a prison in the darkness. And part of the drama in the Kabbalistic myth is the divine trying to redeem the word. Now, how does the divine redeem the word? Through the people of Israel. We are understood as it were, the extensions of the divine, redeeming the divine word from the darkness. And of course, that darkness is us. So the Kabbalists took this very, very seriously. The slavery in Egypt was a this worldly manifestation of the word of the divine being lost, imprisoned in the darkness of human beings. So again, it's this. So the story of Egypt is there, according to the Kabbalists and the Hasidim, to give us an historical image of the drama of the soul, the trapped spark, the trapped word of God in every human being. So when you think it from this perspective, why are we gathering for Passover? Well, certainly to commemorate the exodus from Egypt and all the other reasons we gather for Passover. But the Hasidic rabbis would say, we're here to teach each other how to redeem the light imprisoned in the darkness, the holy word imprisoned in the darkness of the soul. That's what the Seder is about, according to the Hasidim. I'll go a little bit further and say that when I looked at the Haggadah of the Sfat Emet, my favorite Hasidic teacher that I've been studying virtually my entire adult life, he has an extensive teaching on the idea of the world of Sheker, Olama de Shikara, and then Sfat Emet, the words of truth. So I'll share a little bit about that now, because I think from the Hasidic perspective, this is the major symbol of Passover. It's not on the table, so therefore it's a verbal symbol. I haven't figured out yet how to find something that represents the idea of the verbal God being imprisoned on the word of God being imprisoned in Egypt. But I think just explaining it is good enough. And remember, when I talk about the inner Haggadah, you may not want to bring this up at your personal Seder. It might be too complex of an idea. Many people don't understand mysticism, and they just really want to come have a good time, engage in the Seder for a little while, and then enjoy the dinner. That's why I gave the inner Seder on Wednesday, was to help people have an inner life experience of the story. So let me tell you about just a few words about the Sfat Emet and the understanding of the imprisoned word. So going from the Kiddush, where it says God has raised us among all the languages of the world, the Lishonot. And you can look in the Kiddush, and the Sfat Emet says, okay, there's a sense that the Jews are the chosen people, and the Hebrew language is better than every other language. Now remember, I use this as a metaphor because the people of Israel, of course, comes the word Yisrael, and Yisrael means those who struggle with the divine, or I would say put significant effort into knowing the divine. So instead of thinking of the particularism of the Jewish people, I talk about the particularism of that subset of people who want to live holy lives, authentic lives, lives rooted in truth. So try to imagine that this is not the Israelites in particular, it's a subset of humanity. Therefore, Jews, non-Jews, any person who walks the earth wants to live authentically, justly, connected to the truth within. Again, not my truth, but the truth as it is found within me, and to connect to the truth of other people. So the Safat Emet mourns the idea that the word of truth of God was broken apart and descended in a fragmented way into the souls of human beings and trapped there. So now we have to try to remember that as I release my spark, as it were, and other people release their sparks, here he says something very interesting. He says the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet were also jumbled up and put in our souls and in other people's souls. And that one way we reassemble the Word of God is to study this with other people. They have a few letters of the Hebrew alphabet. I have a few letters of the Hebrew alphabet. I have my fragment of the truth. They have their fragment of the truth. And when we study together, it's as if the truth gets reassembled among us and between us. And again, I've never been to a Hasidic Seder that was run in this way, but just try to imagine. Again, I'm not suggesting you do it. Not everybody's going to be ready for it, but try to imagine. We're sitting here tonight to understand there is something called the truth, not the absolute truth, but something called closer to the truth. It takes a lot of effort to understand the truth of myself, who I am as a human being, which is always a work in process, to see myself as having the possibility to fall into pretense, as the poem suggested, to fall into falseness. So I know that I know when I'm falling into falseness and when I'm closer to living what I would call a life of truth. So you gather people who know the difference between the authentic self, the self searching for truth, and imagine the Seder as an assembly of people who are willing to tell enough of their stories, but also ideas of how people fall into truth. In fact, the Sfat Emet says it's well known that the Torah was broken into, the Hebrew language at the Tower of Babel story was broken into 70 languages. But only one language is the Sfat Emet, the language of truth. So I read that and thought to myself, just as there are 50 ways to leave your lover, there are 69 ways to lie. Again, I haven't extended that metaphor enough. Maybe I'll do that next year. So just try to remember, there are 70 ways to talk. Only one is true, 69 ways to lie. And then we can sit and ask ourselves, again, this would be the ideal Seder in my mind. We all know what it means to be a person of truth. We all know what it means to dissemble, to have pretension. So can an assembly of people share how to live lives of truth? By the way, there are books on this. As I was researching the idea, this idea, as you can imagine, is well developed in many ways of thinking. So the Sfat Emet says that the Passover Seder, therefore, is there to help us learn how to speak language of truth. Sfat Emet means language of truth. So here's where he playfully takes the word Pesach and breaks it into Pesach. You find this in the rabbinic tradition as well, but the Hasidic tradition made it into the main verbal symbol of Passover, Pesach. We're teaching ourselves how to speak the truth. Now, reading the Haggadah is not going to teach you how to speak the truth. So in my mind, a group of people said, this is what we're talking about. We're all going to talk about what it means to speak the truth. Whatever they did with the traditional Haggadah, that was their focus. So in addition to the symbols that you put on the table, and one thing we've done, we've always put fun symbols. We put a frog on the table once. We put a slinky on the table, so that we learn to not to slink out of Egypt, but rather walk out of Egypt upright. We have all kinds of gimmicks to make the Seder fun, uh, and to keep people involved and having a good time. Many people find themselves really wanting to talk about the deeper things. Something I've mentioned is do that on your own, do that before Passover Seder. Don't try to do that in a group of hungry, impatient people, unless you have a really remarkable group of people who are willing to engage in the deeply reflective aspects of Seder. So let me get now into the transformative dimension. We have the ritual, we have the historical, textual, we have the symbolic, including verbal symbols, and now the transformative. So on Wednesday night, I showed a little bit of, for me, what the transformative Seder is, and what it means for me is I read through the Haggadah, and then I wait for something in the Haggadah to reach out to me, and as it were, as an opening into my soul. So I'll just share with you a couple of that, just to show you how to do it. For me, it always begins with Baruch Atah Adonai, and I would love you if you internalize this teaching. Baruch means source of blessing, not blessed, but source of blessing. Atah is you, spoken directly into the divine, into the heart of the universe. And Adonai is the way we pronounce Yahweh. Yahweh, Yud He Vav He, is from the Hebrew word to be. It's in the causative, so it's translated as the cause of being. Cause of being. So I meditated not Baruch Atah Adonai, but rather Adonai, you are the source of blessing. Now, I say Adonai, and then I moved into Yahweh, thinking it to myself, right away into English, cause of being. For me, I remember my studies of Aristotle, where he tries to talk about the quality of being in a book called the Organon, which is a very, very difficult book. But the main part of it is, of all the attributes of the human being, one attribute is we are people who be, as it were, which means we is as opposed to is not. I am as opposed to am not. So I meditate on my pure being as a human being before my identity, before my race, religion, culture, gender, anything about me. Try to experience the idea of pure being entering in me, and my pure being channeling through me and out into the world. So just the meditation on pure being, that's contained in Adonai or Yahweh or cause of being. Now, it has to be an intentional meditation. You don't just read it, you read it, internalize it, reflect on it, enough to the point that you actually feel a connection. For me, I feel it in my chest. I feel a connection between the realm of my soul and the unconscious and in the conscious mind that is actually doing this work. So it's a linking up of the experiential dimension of the soul, where poetry is understood, music is written and appreciated. So the realm of the soul that knows love, justice, truth, beauty, all of our values, a sense of being undergirds all of that. And I bring down what I'm doing in my conscious mind down into the realm of the soul. So whenever I have the time, that's how I meditate on Baruch Atah Adonai, or cause of being, you are the source of blessing. The next thing I do when I'm in that moment of pure being is then I imagine the word Atah. So I'm in this consciousness of pure being, and then I try to imagine directly across from me, as it were, is Atah, which means the divine being encountering my being encountering the divine being. It's the second person singular, you. It's the I, thou moment with God. People say to me, well, what if I don't believe in God? I say, well, you know how to read a poem. You know what people mean when they say the soul of the universe, the heart of the universe. You don't have to believe it, but you can imagine it. So just try to imagine my I meeting the divine thou, and the divine I, and that I am the thou of the divine. So there's this I thou moment between me and the divine. Again, ideally, at least a few times a year, sink into that very, very deeply. If you sink into it deeply a few times, it's etched in your memory. You will never, ever forget it. And it changes the way you see yourself and the world. Because once you can actually imagine the divine you and that we are the you of the divine, it'll appear to you at the oddest times. You'll be walking in the mall, driving in your car, and you'll just have a sense that I am the you of the divine is the you of me. As my heart connects to the divine heart, my being connects to divine me. It's a very powerful moment saying you into the divine. And then the word Baruch is one of the ways, a modality in which the beingness of God is channeled to us as a source of blessing. So what I do is I sit and I try to imagine what it would be if I were a receptacle of the divine blessing. When you think of the priestly blessing, whatever it means to bless another person, which for me, I think it means to will the good for another person. That's what I think about when I say a blessing at a wedding or a bar bat mitzvah. I say the priestly blessing. I'm trying to imagine, whether it's true or not, that for a moment I am channeling the divine blessing and just trying to bestow a life of goodness as much as one person can do this for another into the life of another human being. Now, imagine that that is possible, that there are sometimes you are such a clear channel of divine blessing that you are able to channel blessing into the life of a person who needs your blessing. I happen to believe that this is true. But I think to believe that it's true, we ought to imagine the divine blessing channeling into us. So when I was doing my inner Haggadah on Tuesday, I spent a lot of time. I think the people at the coffee shop thought I fell asleep because I had my eyes closed. Uh, but I was just imagining Adonai, you, source of blessing, going back and forth until I could really feel it register into my soul. I locked it in, I engraved it, and then, as it were, I knew I was ready to do a few more steps in the Haggadah, what I would call my inner life experience of the Haggadah. Now, when I do this, I don't know which words, which passages are going to jump out at me and say, interpret me, come into my inner chamber of meaning. I also don't know what I'm going to find there. So as it were, my thinking is paused, my openness to experience is engaged. Uh, when I encounter a word that seems to sparkle with possibility, I simply stand before the word, and the meanings in the word come out toward me. I'm not intending the meaning arrives at me. So clearly, pardon me, these meanings are already assembled in the soul, but instead of my trying to think of meaning, I let my soul do the thinking for me, and it comes out. So this goes back to the Baal Shem Tov's idea that every word of a holy text is an entry into angels, worlds, and souls. He says it a few different ways in his commentary on the Ark of Noah, where it says, "Put a light in the ark." He says, "Put a light into the word." And when you put a light into the word and you peer down inside the word, you see angels, worlds, souls, etc. So a few things. So when I went through it and I came to the four questions, something that I said recently in a conversation with another person popped to mind. And when I was in the coffee shop, I thought it with greater clarity than I did in a conversation where I just thought it up when the person said to me, uh, um, it was an Israeli who was a practicing Buddhist, and I shared that although meditation is great, um, uh, intentional contemplation, from my perspective, can produce transformation better than emptying the mind. Now, there are great teachings in Buddhism, and especially Zen Buddhism, but you have to fill your mind with the teaching. So, in addition to a meditative practice, there has to be a contemplative practice, and oftentimes contemplative practices are contemplating holy words, holy phrases, and then internalizing them. So, this person asked me, so what's my path? And I kind of, it came out of my soul. And I said, there are four questions. This was in a this was in a coffee shop about 6 months ago. And it came out again, this is a refined version of what happened 6 months ago, and now I had a better version, not yet the best. I'll think about this, which would be the following. Uh, what are your goals? What do you want out of life? Don't edit it. You want to be able to crochet, you want to learn ballet, whatever it is. What do you want out of life? And then bring it down to what Frankl would say, your core existential concerns, which are love and belonging, number one, and righteousness and having a conscience. So the drives to love and justice, from Frankl's perspective, are primary drives from the soul. So whatever else you want to do, there's a drive in you to link up to other human beings where you are of service to their souls, and ideally, they are of service to your soul. Secondly, within that relationship, to act justly and righteously, which is the motivating force of my wisdom works, by the way. If we are going to have bonds with other people, let's do it righteously and justly, with conscience and conscientiousness. Frankl then talks about in his book, The Man's Search for Ultimate Meaning, there's also a drive to art, to both create art and experience art. So something like experiencing beauty wherever you can find it, and if you have the ability to create beauty whenever you can. For example, these wonderful poems that we read on Friday night is somebody taking the drive to create beauty and creating beautiful poetry. I would simply add to Frankl, I don't think he talks about this, which is the philosophic pursuit of truth. For me, and probably most of you, it's something that I will do. Uh, a drive is something you do if you didn't get paid for it. A drive would be something that no one could offer you enough money not to do. Now, not some people have a drive toward excellence in art, other endeavors. I have a drive to study, 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 and get closer and closer to the truth. So I think we have four basic drives. One is love. The other two is what he calls conscience or righteousness, art, the experience of beauty, and I would say the pursuit of the truth of things. Let me give you a banal example. Um, I was talking to a friend many years ago, as they were having real trouble with his parents, and he said to me, parents shouldn't be this way. So he had the ought. And when you ever put an ought on other people, that can lead to misery. The activating event is his parents aren't nice to him. The emotional consequence was he's miserable. The underlying belief, a belief of what his parents should be like. His parents weren't like that, so he was, as it were, placing a should upon them that created his misery. I pointed this out to him, my bringing down the thought of Albert Ellis. I said, from what I know, um, some people just didn't win the lottery on parents. They barely got a consolation prize. In fact, they might never be consoled. It just never worked out. It was a mismatch. They had spiritually and morally lazy parents. Who knows? But when you say so I said there's a better belief, and the better belief is some people are not really qualified to parent when they're raising their kids. Maybe when they become grandparents, they figured it out, but not when they were young, struggling parents, figuring out among themselves, struggling through life, acrimony in the home. The kid grows up in this, and the kid is not getting what they authentically need as a child because not everybody's ready to be a parent. I said, I think that's the truth. So when we have parents that are not qualified to parent when they were parenting you, for example. Okay. Therefore, what's my belief? My belief is I was parented by people who weren't qualified at the time to be a parent. I said, does that sound true? He says, yeah, that sounds pretty true. So, so what ought your parents be? Okay. He says, there is no ought. It's just what they are. I said, so what's the ought on you? Reflect on who my parents are, how they were. Don't place on them the should of how to be unless they want my opinion on it. And therefore, the greatest ought is for me, with as much consciousness and dignity and honor as possible, get myself out of there. We could say, get myself out of Egypt. What's the emotional consequence of putting a should on your parents? Misery and anger. What's the emotional consequence of actually understanding exactly who your parents are, what the limitations are? Emotional consequence. Sadness. I'm sad about it. I'm sad for them. I'm sad for me. But then comes, what do I want to be? I want to be an angry person resenting his parents? Or do I want to birth myself into a light of consciousness, dignity, and beauty, and not hold my parents in the prison of my judgmentalism? So here's an example. When I say the search for truth, I don't mean studying Plato and Aristotle. I mean simply using Albert Ellis's idea of activating adverse event, um, underlying beliefs, producing a predictable emotional consequence. Activating event, my parents were mean to me. Belief, they shouldn't have been. Consequence, anger and resentment. You rearrange that. You rearrange that. You go back into your belief system. My belief system is not everybody's qualified to be a parent. There was no adverse event. It just was. It was bad. It was a tragedy. What's the emotional consequence of that? Sadness, a willingness to be a better parent if I'm blessed enough to be a parent, but whatever it is, don't bring my inner struggle and make it a struggle with other people. Keep my inner struggles and try to work on it. So I'm giving you a sense that I think every person should try to understand at least the truth of their situation, and don't understand situations through ought. Understand situations through is. And the main ought you should bring into life is the ought upon yourself. What, this being the case, this is this one conversation with a guy many years ago. This being the case, that I was raised by parents who weren't qualified to do it, I can't place an ought on them. That'll just make me upset. I can place an ought upon myself. He didn't have kids at the time. Don't do it to children, if and when he had children. And number two, in general, don't inflict my pain on other people. Watch how that experience in my childhood may have shaped me as a human being. And in general, try to live life consciously, driving toward righteousness. I don't know if I had that exact vocabulary at that time, but I certainly communicated something like that. So I would say our authentic drives are toward love, righteousness, beauty, and the search for truth, even in just the truth of the situation. Okay. So this I said, and so what are you after? And she said, I want to know God, but I'm not Orthodox. I said, so what have you done? "Oh, I've gone to a Zen retreats and we meditate and don't talk." I said, it might not be the best thing if you have a Judaic image of God and you're going to a Zen retreat. And said, okay, let's hold that. And then I asked, hold on a second, what's stopping you from knowing God? And she said, I guess I'm not doing it the right way. Maybe a silent retreat is not the best way to know God. So I think you might want to ask somebody um, who knows what it means to know God in a more traditional Western way. By the way, I had my regular bookstore meeting yesterday. It's a wonderful experience I have every Friday. A bunch of oddballs, misfits, intellectuals, artists, philosophers gather at a local bookstore every Friday. And we're sitting in the entrance, and a kid walks in, and before he gets in, he asks somebody, "Do you have any books on spirituality?" And they all look at me and say, "Ask that guy." I said, "What are you after?" He goes, "No, it just works on spirituality." I said, "What is your specific question?" He says to me, "I don't know. That's a good question." I said, what have you already studied? He said, I studied the Hermetic tradition, which is um, meditations on ancient Mediterranean knowledge rooted in the Gnostic traditions. Hermetic, because it's as it were hermetically sealed. It is not hermetically sealed. Anybody can study. It's all in translation. I said, may I offer a thought? He said, sure. I said, what I'm going to guess is you found it fascinating, but not applicable to your inner search. He said, exactly. It was really interesting. It was not useful, and I want to find something useful. Um, and then I said to them, I said, how serious are you? Are you ready to read a hard book? He says, absolutely. But this was an Israeli 21-year-old with his rifle draped across his shoulder. I could tell by his t-shirt and his boots, he was in an elite unit. And he says, I want something that I can take back to my base, and remind me I'm more than a combat soldier, that I have a soul. It was really kind of a beautiful moment. I said, what's your name? Maxim. So he's a child of Russian immigrants. His parents were standing behind him, by the way. I said, I'm going to give you the name of a book. It's a hard book, but it's the book. He says, what is it? The Act of Will by Roberto Assagioli and everything that Assagioli ever wrote. I said, bring it up on your phone. He looked at it. He showed me the book with the six-pointed star. And I said, that's the book. And, I'm here every Friday if you ever want to come by and ask a question. So when the experience 6 months ago, when the person said, what's stopping me, what's stopping this person was, I think, going to the wrong place if you want to know God in a more Western idea. And secondly, interesting in this conversation, the person said, I'm not Orthodox. And I thought, what does that have to do with anything? It's not that most Orthodox people know God. I think they're Orthodox. That doesn't mean they know God. And I know many secular people who know God far beyond what an Orthodox Jew could dream. I said that has nothing to do with it. I said, the Orthodox don't own religion. They have a certain way to practice religion. And that's a real problem here in Israel, by the way. Secular Israelis feel that the Jewish religion belongs to the Orthodox. So if you take a religion seriously, you're as it were, deferring to the Orthodox. And I say, absolutely not, which is one reason I found a non-Orthodox Jewish study center for secular Jews, actually just a short walk from my home. So we talked about that. And then I just had an instinct, and I said to this person, where's your pain? Where's your suffering? And the person, came to as much tears as you can come to in a coffee shop and said, I've wanted this my whole life. I've just never known how to do it. And I just keep postponing it year after year. I go to a Buddhist retreat every now and then. I just feel so unfulfilled. And this person's sorrow really was the sorrow of never finding a way to know God. And I said, look, I can offer you some thought on that. And then the fourth question is, what what will you do? What are you ready to do to achieve, I say, a goal that's become a purpose? It's a goal if you want to do it and you're ready to do it. It becomes purpose when you will work through resistance, you'll work through pain, you'll do whatever it takes within reason. And the person said, I think I'm ready. And I remember after my conversation, which was very spontaneous, I thought, well, I think I have a kind of a teaching there. What do you want? What's stopping you? Where's your pain? And what are you ready to do about it? And so then when I came to the four questions, in the Haggadah, the wise, the rebellious, the simple, and the one who does not know how to ask, I meditated on the wise child. And I thought the greatest use of wisdom is applying wisdom in those drives that Frankel talks about, the wisdom of love, the wisdom of righteousness, the wisdom for art, the wisdom for truth. Okay, that's the wise son. So there's a tendency to see the wise son as the goody two shoes. I see it very different. That is the greatest, in my mind, aspiration of a human being, to live a life of wisdom, serving the spiritual drives of love, justice, beauty, and truth that Frankel talks about. The rebellious son. So the rebellious son, why do they call him the rebellious son? Because it says, what do these mitzvot mean to you? Now, in the Bible, it's very benign, but they make it sound like a kid who no longer wants to be part of the tradition. And I meditated on this. What does this mean to you? And I landed on people that I've counseled when they talked about this is oftentimes young people with families that are really hurting them. Parents who won't let up, interfering with every part of their life, especially wealthy parents who are using the money as a way to control. If you don't do it our way, we're cutting off the funding, which I think borders on evil. And he says, I want out. I don't want this anymore. I don't want to play their game. He says, but I can't. I can't support myself independently. Now, that's a complex question. But the sense is, I don't want to live in that family anymore. I don't want to learn how to live in this family. I don't want to how to learn to defer to people who don't love me. They just want to control me, and they're going to hurt me if I don't do it their way. He says, I want out. I said, eventually what you'll need to do, unless your parents change, unless the brother who teases you mercilessly, or way worse than teasing, you may have to find new family, which means a group of people who are like-minded that you imagine them to be like a chavurah, that you're going to go through life with them. And so I shared what it means to find alternative community when family's not working out. That was my spontaneous meditation on the second son. The third son, who just says mazot, I meditated on that, and I just thought the moment of awe and wonder, either for me it went to wonder. Truly, the first time I saw the Grand Canyon, I was stupefied. But certainly, when I contemplate on the depth of wisdom in our tradition, or when I contemplate the depth of the soul of a person with whom I'm working, I don't have words for it. I don't know how to explain it. I don't know how to define it. I just say mazot. I live in the presence of the wonder and the mystery. That's the third child or son, as it were. The fourth one is the one who does not know how to ask. In the depictions, it's like a baby can't even get the words out. But I saw this as a kind of a high level of spirituality, which is in the presence of the mystery, you don't have to think. You don't have to talk. You don't even have to say mazot. You can just sit there in silence. And as I was sitting in the coffee shop doing my inner Haggadah, I just imagined myself the times in my life where I've encountered something so stupendous and so deep that I didn't want to think. I just wanted to bask in the moment because I knew the moment was going to end. The moment would end before the moment would finish with me before I was finished with the moment. And then I reflected on the idea of the authenticity of wisdom, the authenticity of the person that says, I don't want to be here anymore. I don't want to learn your laws because your laws are corrupt. I want to go someplace and create a community around laws of truth. The beginner mind of Mazot, the going back to I don't know anything, let me understand this from the very beginning. And the as it were, the state of mind, the consciousness of of being in pure silence before the mystery. Anyway, last Wednesday night I went through moments in most of the Haggadah, and I with these kinds of meditations. We'll have that recording up soon. So, Mirav, are we going to send an email out when that recording is ready to our people? I think we've decided to do that. Yeah, the nod is yes. All right, so I've given you a sense of the ritual dimension. Maybe do the Seder with the Haggadah on ready, but doing what I'll call the minimal Seder and just doing it as it were jamming style. The history of the traditions, you'll find that in the book of Exodus. Number three, understanding the symbolic dimensions, especially the verbal symbols. I included a meditation in my blog of the Jewish Journal on the idea of the Word of God in exile. And the transformative dimension means doing your own inner Seder, picking moments of the Seder, letting your soul have a conversation with the symbols, very lightly guided by the conscious mind, but most of the talking is done with the soul. And for me, this is a profoundly rich experience. It's actually it's my observance of Passover. And then when I come to a Seder, I might mention it, I might not. I don't want to say that other people have to think my way or do it my way, but I'm offering this to you as your own spiritual Seder, and maybe being able to offer this to other people as you wish.